Welcome back to Resolve Reptiles. As you know, I definitely like to talk a lot about disease inside of the reptile hobby slash community slash large collections. And of course, I also like to kick the crap out of ethical organizations because 99% of the time they are either pumping outright disinformation or just have some complete other agenda. Today, we're going to be beating on responsible reptile keeping again. This is an organization that I don't feel is going to benefit the reptile hobby whatsoever, led by a marketing manager. It's a whole thing. There's a little bit of another kind of ranty video that I did, discussed it. They're incorporating, the standard hit list. So you've got Reptiphiles with their semi-plagiarized articles and all of that stuff. Today, we're going to be specifically talking about these videos that they put up regarding Salmonella. You see there's a short there. There's also like a somewhat full-length video where they say that there's a reptile salmonella myth. Unfortunately, there is a reptile salmonella fact. I don't know why they called this a myth. It's something that's very special. I'm not going to play the video for you, but basically you've got this guy talking to other people, and he says, "Have you caught salmonella from your reptile?" Here's the thing. I will tell you, probably. And that is an actual fact. People that are exposed to salmonella will develop what's called salmonellosis. Salmonellosis is the actual disease expressed when you are infected with the bacteria. That's a little bit pedantic. I don't expect him to say salmonellosis, but just for the record, as we move through some of this material, we may see those two different terms, and it's always good to be able to tell the difference. Similarly, there was some talk about, can you get cryptosporidium? Well, that's not the name of the disease. That's the name of the organism. So when you say things like this, it sometimes makes it murky about what they're talking about. One of the kind of interesting parts about this video is, one, it's presented in a format where it's just hand waving, "Oh, no, of course, I've never gotten salmonella from my reptile," right? Which is kind of a very strange way to speak about disease, which we'll talk about a little bit more. I want to highlight that part of this, it says, "It's long been believed that all reptiles carry salmonella." No, it's long been believed that reptiles have the potential to carry salmonella, and the fact that most living organisms can carry things like salmonella and E. coli. That's an actual 100% fact. So the first line in this, completely busted. The second one, however, an increasing body of evidence suggests salmonella isn't as prevalent as previously thought. What does this mean? What does this mean? Salmonella isn't as prevalent as previously thought in the world, in the reptile community, in the reptile hobby? What exactly does that mean? It's not the fact that it's prevalent or the fact that anytime you interact with a reptile, you are automatically exposed to salmonella. That alone is a myth that they are trying to push and not something that anybody is particularly saying. This also says that, pathology laboratory tests reveal that few reptiles present with salmonella infections. That's been known for, this was put out over a decade ago. We know that reptiles have the potential to carry salmonella, and we know that reptiles are generally not affected by salmonella. This is something known for over a decade. So right out of the gate, without even watching the hand wavy video, you know that this video is complete and utter nonsense, and then, of course, is labeled with a salmonella myth. There is no salmonella myth. There is an actual fact. So what would possess them to make such a ridiculous video? Well, we're going to go ahead and trip through some articles that talk about salmonella. The first thing that we're going to talk about is right here on the Mayo Clinic, whatever it is. Right here on this webpage, you're going to see the difference between salmonellosis, which was already discussed, and you're also going to see the different sort of symptoms of a salmonella infection. So here it says most people develop diarrhea, fever, stomach, lasts a couple days. They'll, develop these sort of symptoms within 8 to 72 hours after exposure. So here's the thing. For an average healthy adult like myself, if I was to be exposed to salmonella and I was actually, infected by the salmonella bacteria and developed salmonellosis, I would more than likely attribute my upset stomach to a bad night where I ate too much Taco Bell. It's not going to be something that I would have to go to any sort of, to seek treatment for. So I would never know if I actually had salmonella. Many people aren't even affected and can actually fight off the bacteria, no problem. The problem here, the core problem here, is that salmonella can disproportionately affect different types of populations. So if you have somebody that's immunocompromised, if you have somebody that may be, a senior citizen, again, somewhat immunocompromised, if you have a very small child, then of course they could also not be able to fight back the infection. The actual salmonellosis can cause severe dehydration, which is something that you don't want in children. And of course, you wouldn't want in something like a senior citizen because they may not be able to report that they have that current symptom or what they're currently going through. And it may not even be noticed that they have a little bit of gastrointestinal distress. So the problem here is not people contracting salmonellosis. It's that when it is contracted, even if it's just 1%, even if it's 0.0001%, the fact that you could potentially expose these groups that are disproportionately affected by the bacteria, that's the problem. There's no myth here. This is a literal fact. And this isn't targeting reptiles. We say that things like squirrels, dogs, cats, all of these animals, raccoons, can contract rabies. That doesn't mean that all of them have rabies. That's the most ridiculous way to think about it, and I have no idea why people in the reptile hobby can't figure out how to separate these things. The possibility that a wild dog can have rabies means you should reduce your exposure to wild dogs. The possibility that you could be disproportionately affected by something like salmonella means that you need to take extra precautions when you are exposed to any animal, not just reptiles, any animal. In fact, any human as well. You can just as easily be exposed to salmonella when you go to the grocery store. You can be exposed to salmonella when you go to a public pool. You can be exposed to salmonella when you go to the restroom. The fact that reptiles are said to carry salmonella, not be affected by it, so you won't know that they are carrying salmonella, and that you can be exposed to salmonella is a literal fact. There's no myth here. It is a literal fact. And the fact is, another fact is that if you are a relatively healthy adult and you're exposed to this, you may not develop symptoms whatsoever, or you may develop symptoms that you'll simply chalk up to eating too many spicy foods. So if I was to ask somebody, have you gotten salmonella from your reptile? And they didn't answer, probably. That individual is not educated, is not at an adult level of thinking where they're able to discern the information that they are being given. Period. Again, it's the same as comparing do not expose yourself to wild dogs if you cannot accept the exposure to rabies. It's the same exact thing. It's the exact same thing. Now, when it comes to animals and disease, the CDC, of course, this is an organization here in the U.S., Center for Disease Control. We want to limit the amount of disease. That's exactly what this organization is for. So this talks about, we've even recently made changes to the way that you can import dogs into the U.S. because of diseases that they may be able to carry. So once again, when somebody says, well, this is disproportionate to the reptile hobby, they're bullying reptile keepers. We literally just changed how you can import dogs and cats. There is no myth, there is no conspiracy, there is nothing. There is only disease management, where we've proven as sources of disease. If you've been in the reptile hobby for any amount of time, then of course you've probably seen this bearded dragon article. This, of course, was not that. It was pretty recent. Now, of course, bearded dragons can carry salmonella. As we talked about, reptiles can carry salmonella. Almost all animals can carry salmonella. You can be exposed to salmonella by those animals, period. There's no myth. That's it. Now, the CDC in this particular instance, they were able to track these salmonella outbreak, infections, string of infections, however you want to say it, to people that had been exposed to bearded dragons. Now, this is a fact. There's no myth to it. The most obvious example was that each one of these people, these 15 people, I believe it was, across 9 different states, had been hospitalized, and however, there were no deaths reported. Again, these people were probably underage, which the CDC does identify here. 60% of the sick people were children under 5 years old. This is that disproportionately affected population that we've already talked about. You don't want a child dehydrated, especially one under 5 years old. That's a critical point in life where you want to reduce the amount of disease. Now, again, children specifically, I want to mention is that these individuals are the ones that are going to be on the floor. They're going to be the ones constantly putting their hands in their mouth. They're going to be the ones that handle the animal, set it on the floor, put it on their clothes, do all of these things, and then maybe put it back up. And then they have all of the opportunity to just eat that salmonella whenever they can, right? So it's the possibility that not only children can actually be exposed to salmonella, but they are a population that is going to be predisposed to having behaviors that will increase the possibility of being exposed to and contracting the disease of salmonellosis, including becoming dehydrated. This article explains all of this. All of this is explained. If you are a normal information consumer, like ethical keepers and organizations like Responsible Reptile Keeping are supposed to be, if you're a regular information consumer, this article tells you exactly what the problem is. There's no myth here. There's no myth. These are all facts. If you've been in the reptile hobby for any amount of time, as mentioned with the bearded dragon thing, then you also know about small turtles. This is another example where, pet shops used to have these big open sort of aquarium, terrarium type things, right, with all of these turtles in them. And they're cute and they're adorable, and people love to see the baby turtles, and children will walk up, and these turtles are small enough that a child could go and, grab one. Just yoink, just grab that turtle, right? Now, of course, a child that has picked up a turtle may not be noticed. What's the first thing that children do? They put things in their mouth, right? You want to find out what it is, you taste it, apparently. So once again, the behavior of this group that are disproportionately affected by this bacteria and can contract this disease where they are disproportionately effective, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, have behaviors that increase the possibility of contracting disease from this bacteria because they stick their fingers in their mouth. You may not notice a tiny turtle getting put in someone's mouth. You may not notice, a turtle being taken out and set on the floor. You have water that is being splashed around, et cetera, et cetera. All of these behaviors have made these turtles dangerous to children. It was something they couldn't keep their hands off of, and there has been a federal ban on people doing these sorts of things where they have these turtles on display and access to children. This, again, there's no myth. There's no disproportionate targeting of the reptile hobby. There's nothing like that going on. It is a fact. It is a fact that these were vectors for disease. It is a fact. There's no question whatsoever. Now, the other thing that I want to talk about is that you are exposed to salmonella pretty regularly. You are exposed to salmonella pretty regularly. So if you go to something like the grocery store and you see all of the things like chicken, out in the deli area, and you know that is a source of foodborne illness. Everybody says, don't drink raw or undercooked foods or eat them, either, because you will be exposed to things like salmonella. There are other vectors for things like E. coli and salmonella when it comes to food source. Now, of course, salmonella is generally contributed to the feces-oral route, but you don't consider that when it comes to things like feces entering food or being exposed or having food exposed to it is where this salmonella comes from, right? So just as an example between these turtles and bearded dragons, etc., is not only are you being exposed to it by the food that you eat, but also when we think about the way that we feed these animals. So let's say that I go to the store and I buy something like, let's say a head of lettuce, right? You shouldn't feed your bearded dragon lettuce, but let's just say, right? So this is something that's traditionally eaten raw. And if that material has been exposed to any sort of pathogens, then that's where you get foodborne illnesses from. Well, you'll say, well, I washed my food. Well, that doesn't really matter when it comes to plants because sometimes this bacteria can find its way inside of the plant fibers. This is a real thing. Again, you can go look this up. There are plenty of restaurants that have fallen for this, etc. When it comes to other foods, let's say spinach, which again, you shouldn't feed spinach to a bearded dragon, but for the sake of conversation, let's talk about it. If you were to take spinach and feed it to an animal, you probably wouldn't cook it. If you were to eat spinach yourself, you would probably cook it. Mustard greens, now that is something that you would feed to a bearded dragon. That's another vector where you would probably cook mustard greens. I don't know anybody that likes to eat mustard greens raw, so I'm assuming that you would go ahead and boil or blanch or whatever those things. Cooking neutralizes the threat of those foodborne illnesses, just like chicken, etc. However, if you were to take these mustard greens, feed them to your bearded dragon, and they had been exposed to salmonella, even if you had washed them, now your bearded dragon could be carrying salmonella. There's no myth here. This is literally how it works. And that's the same way that it works with other animals as well. There was actually a recall of a lot of dog food that actually contained salmonella. It had been exposed to that and had become contaminated with salmonella. Dogs were catching salmonella. Now, of course, when it comes to a dog, when they catch salmonella, more than likely that dog would, you've got the dog's nose isn't wet, et cetera, et cetera. So you have a way to identify that that animal may have something going on. There may be something that you can catch. Of course, when it comes to dog, feces, then obviously if you've got your dog that's having a bit of a bad day, a bit of the runs, then you're probably going to be careful not to grab that and put it in your mouth, unless of course you're a 5-year-old kid crawling around on the floor that may be exposed to that. Once again, that disproportionate effect on that certain population. These are all ways that you can get salmonella, not just from reptiles, but from any animal, including humans. When it comes to organizations like RRK, just hand waving away the possibility, this is incredibly stupid. Before somebody says, oh, that's an ad hominem. No. An ad hominem is when I say, don't listen to RRK because they're stupid, and end it there. I'm telling you, these are the facts. And to hand wave away disease makes the reptile hobby look stupid and definitely makes RRK look very stupid. This is supposed to be an organization that includes a lot of volunteers, a lot of vets, a lot of people that are able to evaluate this information at an adult level to consume that information and not turn around and make some weird hand wavy video trying to kind of suggest that salmonella, you can't be exposed to salmonella through reptiles. You can. Have I been exposed to salmonella? Absolutely. Have I actually resulted in any sort of disease such as salmonellosis from being exposed to salmonella that I was exposed to by a reptile? Who knows? But the potential is non-zero. And the fact that it is non-zero means that we need to be aware of populations that are disproportionately affected. When we handle raw foods, we need to be aware for ourselves and populations that are disproportionately affected. And we need to understand that in some cases, diseases will affect people disproportionately, even though it doesn't affect us. Again, if I was exposed to salmonella from one of my reptiles, I would more than likely just chalk it up to eating Taco Bell that day. All of these reasons are why Responsible Reptiles Keeping's video is just embarrassing to the hobby. On a final note, I want to mention that Kevin McCurley of Nerd. Now, of course, I have my own problems with Nerd, so don't think I'm sitting here saying, oh, Nerd is the pinnacle of reptile. No. However, Kevin McCurley has gone in front of a town hall and explained the exact same things that I have just explained to you. Kevin McCurley of Nerd is more ethical and more informed than Responsible Reptile Keeping. This is why I can't stop kicking these people. I hope you understand.